Well, welcome to Doc Talk with Dr. G. Every Thursday at 7:30 p.m., we have some exciting topics, and tonight, a very dramatic topic, the near-death experience. We're going to dive deep into the near-death experience and look at the science behind near-death experience and whether science can actually explain it or not. Is it a scientific chemical reaction, or is it truly a separation of the body from the spirit? And we're actually very excited to have somebody who had a near-death experience, had a cardiac arrest, had no pulse for 10 minutes after being struck by lightning. Not everybody can say that, and we'll talk about the statistics of being struck by lightning. But it is a very exciting topic. And thank you so much for your support for Doc Talk. We've had a lot of feedback, great feedback about the program. Please be engaged, make some comments below, make some suggestions about future programs. But tonight we have a very, very exciting program. And without any further ado, we'll get right to the presentation. So basically, the near-death experience, or the so-called NED, is a real phenomenon. And we'll talk about the documentation of this in patients who've experienced cardiac arrests or trauma, massive head injury, etc. Even under general anesthetic, some people have a near-death experience. So we're going to talk about it. It's certainly been covered. There is a plethora of journals and medical articles on it. There's also many, many books, some of whom were written by actually physicians and surgeons who underwent a near-death experience themselves. So we have, Proof of Heaven, we have Beyond Death, we have Near-Death Experience, and many, many, many more programs, and also programs, TV programs, and books and articles on it. So we're going to get right into the interview with a survivor of a cardiac arrest out in the field, hit by by lightning. And we have here Jimmy J. Now, Jimmy has, for confidentiality reasons, has decided to remain anonymous, but we will certainly hear his story in very, very vivid details. So we will bring Jimmy in here. Jimmy, here you are. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. And we're gonna go back and take you back to that fateful day, August 15th, 2010. Can you just give us a background as to what was happening that day? I understand this was a Sunday, just what time of the day it was and what your plans were for that day.
So yeah, this was a Sunday. It's typically a day off for me, business wise, and I had lined some business up anyways during the daytime, and it was actually a very it looked like a promising week. It was a sunny day. It was nice out, and we were going to play some football. Now they did call for a rain and a little bit of a storm, but we weren't really concerned because I mean, so many other times we've postponed or canceled games only to have no storm, beautiful day, light rain. So we weren't really too concerned about it. The skies looked good. And I went to go pick up my football gear, and, one of my friends picked me up, one of the players from the game. And he said, listen, if it rains, I'm not playing today. And I said, man, look at the skies. The skies look fine. And as we were getting to the field, yeah, the skies got a little bit grayer. Then rain started to come down. And he actually didn't want to play, but I said, hey, man, we play in the rain. We're all here. We get one day a week to do this. Let's do this. So I ran out to the field, and yeah, we all started to get ready. I mean, whoever showed up first, started to get ready. I think there was probably about 4 or 5 of us. I only remember getting out of the truck, really. I don't remember the other guys showing up or who else was there at the time. And I, from what they told me, I threw my gear on. And this part I actually do remember was I always like to get a couple warm up balls in, just to get my catch a few before the show. And the very first ball that I remember getting passed to me, it was like I stuck my hands up to catch it, and then bang, that's it. That's all I remember was looking up for the ball is really what I remember from that.
So
And
at this, oh, sorry to interrupt, Jimmy. So
no, no, go ahead.
at this point, you're now unconscious. You have no further recollection of the day after that.
I have no idea what's going on. And I don't know. I question whether what happens next was real or something that happened in my imagination. But there's some certain things about it that make me believe that it was 100% real. Um, it was like I was, floating towards what I would say was the sun. I That's the focus of everything. I remember looking at the sun. I remember getting closer to the sun, clouds, getting, moving out of the way, and the sun was there. Um, and then, there was no temperature or anything like that. It was perfect, like just perfect conditions. It's not like I was going up fast. It was nothing scary or anything like that. And then at some point, I go from looking at the sun and and the skies to looking down at the field, and still no rain in the sky or anything like that. It looked like a perfectly sunny day. At this point, the skies were gray, when we got to the field, but at this point, it looked like a perfectly sunny day. I looked down at the field, and I couldn't see anybody. There was nobody on the field. It was like there was nobody there. And now I'm going back down to the field, um, and that was about that. I don't. I woke up in a hospital about 3 weeks, 4 weeks later.
No, Jimmy, here we have a picture, an
Yeah.
actual picture of that day. Can you just describe what's happening here on the Bentine field, this public school field? What's happening here?
So this, I like, obviously I would have been out for it. Yeah, that's me laying down on and they're attending to me. That actually looks like police. Police were first to arrive. Um, yeah, you got a couple guys that we play with there. Um, trying to help me out. It was my brother-in-law, um, and it looks like um, some officers or uh, you know, trying to bring me back, which they were not able to do on the field. They weren't able to bring me back on the field.
Did you
Um,
have a timeline from what you were told by the first line responders as to
so
approximately how long you were without a pulse and having CPR and then eventually defibrillated?
so personally, they had not told me anything. Well, I had so much to deal with in the hospital that we didn't go over those details. And you got to remember, I had woken up uh, over 3 weeks later, so that was really like, in the rearview mirror. But they did say that, based off of the study that they did on my brain, that it was at least 7.5+ minutes that the brain went without oxygen. Um, and for them to not be able to bring me back on the field, it actually took the defibrillator in the ambulance on the way to the hospital to bring me back. So electricity took me down, electricity brought me back.
Well, you were, yes, you were basically without a pulse as a result of electricity, and you were resuscitated, essentially resurrected with the help of defibrillation. Jimmy, just as we conclude, can you just elaborate a little bit more about those minutes that you were ascending into the sky? You felt your body ascending into the sky. Was it a very real experience? Did you perceive it as a very real experience? And were there any other emotions with that as well, like feeling of
So,
pleasure, confidence? Did you hear any music? Just any other details that you can share with us and our
no,
listeners?
no, there wasn't really much else. But it was peaceful. It was no, like I said, it didn't feel hot. It didn't feel cold. It just felt perfect. There was no sounds. One of the reasons why I believe 100% you can't argue it is because that particular storm that day only lasted about 15 minutes, and the skies were sunny. Now, I didn't even know this until I'd spoken to some people um, after I got out of the hospital. I had this experience. I let a few people know, about this experience, and they said, "Yeah, we were out that day, and it rained for about 15 minutes, and then it was a sunny day."
Hmm.
So, for me to get hit and it's a dark, cloudy, rainy day, and then for me to come back and it's already sunny again, actually follows perfectly with how the weather was that day, which was something I didn't expect. Um, but no, everything felt peaceful going up. It was actually coming back down that was more unpleasant. Um,
Well, how was it unpleasant coming down?
I do remember a pain when I was coming back. I don't know if it was something that was happening to me in the ambulance. I don't know if it was something that was happening to me or if it was strictly spiritual. But it was just a bad pain. I couldn't. Your body isn't ascending. It's your I guess your soul, or I don't know what it was, but it didn't feel like a body pain. Like I couldn't say my leg was hurting or my head was hurting or my whatever was hurting. It was just a pain.
Now,
Um,
Jimmy, we're going to be talking about this near-death experience and the different explanations, both from the science in terms of a physical explanation, a neurophysical
mhm.
explanation, but we're also going to talk about a spiritual explanation. Can you just speak to where your life was at, like on a spiritual level before, and how it's changed since this incident of being hit by lightning?
I don't think it changed me all that much. I, I, I really believed I'd never been to any type of ceremony like church or mosque or anything of that nature before, and I haven't been to anything afterwards. But I always did believe there was something else, and this really just kind of cemented it, and it gave me confidence. There's zero fear of death. Um, there might have been questions before this, but after this, yeah, no, I'm really confident in what happens afterwards, and um, it's really something that's not a concern of mine at all.
Did you,
What happens next? Because I feel like I've already experienced at least part of it, and it was fine.
would you classify it potentially as a potential encounter with God?
Yeah, if I did have to say, I would say that I spoke to God that day. Yeah, I would say that. So yeah, I would say it was an encounter, and people would say it's a near death experience, and I would argue that it was a death experience, but it was also a rebirth.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's an interesting term, actually, near death, because essentially, like, you are clinically dead. You have no pulse, no brain activity, although that's controversial, as we'll talk about. But thank you so much for sharing this incredible experience that very few of us, of course, will ever have, and obviously a huge curiosity as to what happens when we die. And you got a little sample of that. And just for interest, Jimmy, I did a bit of research on lightning strikes in Canada, just to
mhm.
put it all into perspective. So, do you know that the electricity in a lightning strike is 100 million volts? That's like
Y-
unfathomable. 100
Yeah,
million volts of electricity. And in
I
Canada, it kills about 10 people per year.
yeah.
It kills lightning kills more people than hail, rain, and tornadoes combined.
Wow.
So it's much more lethal than any other weather condition, including tornadoes. And
Mhm.
here's an interesting thing: the likelihood that Jimmy that you will be struck by lightning is 1 in 1.2 million. So depending on the lottery, you actually may be more likely slightly to get hit by lightning than to win a lottery. But
Yeah.
with with certain other with certain lotteries, actually your chance of getting hit by lightning may actually be higher. So when you look at these statistics, are there any more thoughts as we conclude, Jimmy, when you look at that? And some people say the heat, the measurable heat from a lightning strike is actually hotter than the sun itself.
Yeah,
So
that one there is wild. That one, the it being hotter than the sun to me is that one I didn't know. That one, yeah, that
mm,
one's stunning. Um, the other ones, I'm pretty sure now I'm more likely to get struck by lightning a second time than the first time because of the charge in my
yeah,
body. I don't know how accurate that is. That's just something I heard. And then the other ones, listen, if you get hit with 100 million volts or 50 million volts, I think you're in rough shape either
well,
way.
it's incredible. And can you just speak about the physical effects? Like, are there any scars on your body? And then maybe briefly about head, any potential like head brain injury as a result of that. So just if we could just quickly wrap up with some of the physical effects of that lightning strike.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I have pretty significant scars. When I was discharged from the hospital, or when I woke up in the hospital, I had a scar that ran from where the lightning hit me right around my neck. It was actually wearing a necklace, so I had a faint scar or burn that still you can still kind of see it in the right light that went around my neck, down my the middle of my chest, and then split into two just above my belly button, and then ran down both legs and out my feet. Now I still have a scar on my foot, scars on my heel, a scar on my left leg, and I do have a big visible dark scar. You can't miss it. Some people confuse it for part of a tattoo if I'm wearing a T-shirt that
Right.
runs from my, from around my neck, just down my chest a little bit. Um, Also, when I woke up, about the back half of my feet were blistered. I don't mean little blisters. I mean half my foot was a blister, and that's where the lightning had come out the bottom of my foot.
Well, thank you, Jimmy, so much for your time and for describing this very dramatic event of getting hit by lightning. You're one of very few Canadians that can say you were hit by lightning and you had a out of body near death experience, or as you say, an actual death experience, and you were resurrected from the dead, essentially.
Yeah.
So thank you again for your time, and you're more than welcome to stand by and follow the presentation. We're going to do a brief presentation on the near death experience. And again, thank you so much, Jimmy. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. It's the least I could do. Thanks.
Okay, may be blessed. Okay, so now we're going to go to discuss the near death experience phenomenon. So, near death experience. Just an overview summary of what we're going to talk about. Firstly, what are the features? Jimmy talked about the features of his near death experience, and they're actually very well documented. What is the incidence? In other words, of people that have a cardiac arrest, how many of them proportionally will actually have a near death experience that they will recount? And then we'll talk about the theories of what happens is physical, spiritual. We'll talk about those theories, and then the evidence for the various theories and explanations as to what has really happened. So one of the major leaders and pioneers in studying near-death experiences is actually a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Bruce Grayson, and he wrote a book after. And he was a psychiatrist. He didn't necessarily have any belief in God or out of body experiences, but he recounts the very first time he went to the emergency department to see the lady who had overdosed and had a cardiac arrest. And he went to visit her after she woke up. And at the same time that she was having this, he went to talk to one of her friends. And he had a very detailed conversation with a friend. He had a stain on his tie from spaghetti that he'd eaten earlier. He had very detailed conversation about her friend who'd had the cardiac arrest. And then when she came back, the patient came back, she recalled to Dr. Grayson all the details of that conversation that he had with her friend. So he was way down the hall in a completely different room, and she had all the details right down to the stain uh, on his tie from the spaghetti, and the details of the conversation, the specific details about what he asked and what he discussed with her friend. So this obviously stunned him, and it led him to this great interest in studying the near-death experience in terms of, well, can it be explained biochemically, neurologically, or is it something much more on a spiritual level of an actual separation of spirit and body? So he studied many, many patients, and we'll talk about some of his research as well. So the near-death experience, Dr. Grayson describes, and he's studied more than 2,500 patients, that there are positive and there are negative experiences. So the positive involves a sense of leaving the body, physically leaving the body. And Jimmy talked about that, where he left the body and he was looking up toward the sun, and eventually he came back to the body looking down, descending from the sky. So that's very common. There's a common bright light tunnel. Now, Jimmy saw what he thought was the sun, but it was certainly described as a bright light. And there's a really comfortable, pain-free feeling. And there's a heightened perception. Many people that had near-death experiences say it's actually more real than reality. And so that's the positive. Now, the reality is there are also negative experiences that have been described in near-death experiences, including the inverse of the positive experience. So in other words, instead of peace, tranquility, there's actually panic and depression during near-death experience. There is a void or a black space. And people that have had negative experience actually describe a hellish type of experience, including cries, wails, agony, and torment. And so it's not all positive. There are both positive and negative experiences. When Dr. Grayson surveyed over 2,500 people who'd had near-death experiences. Now, what is the incidence? Like, what is the likelihood that if you have a cardiac arrest, that you're going to have a near-death experience like Jimmy had? So there's actually a great prospective study. It was done in 2002 in the Journal of Near-Death Studies. Obviously, very deep research in that journal on near-death experience. And this is what they found. So they studied prospectively before even doing any kind of a survey, 174 patients who'd had cardiac arrests. Of those, 55 survived, and of those, they interviewed 30. So the 30 survivors of the cardiac arrest were studied, and of them, 11 or 37% had a near-death experience. So it's fairly common, the incidence. So that's more than 1 in 3 people who have a cardiac arrest will have the near-death experience. Not everybody, but over 1/3 will have that. Now, there are two theories, and to sort of break it down, basically there's the theory that this is a physiologic event. It's neurologic. It happens in the brain. It's purely on a physical level. And then there's a spiritual explanation that no, it's actually beyond the physical. There's actually a spirit in the body that leaves the body. And so essentially one focuses on us being as physical beings, if what you would consider consistent with the evolutionary atheistic model. There is no God. It's just physical. We can explain this through brain activity and brain trauma and chemicals and so forth. We'll talk about. But the other says, no, it's actually spiritual. And even Dr. Grayson and many physicians that were once skeptical and atheists actually have come to the conclusion that the only plausible explanation is that there's actually a physical separation of the spirit and the body, that the body literally is separated from the spirit, and it's a spirit that rises up. So Jimmy talked about going up and floating toward the sun. So in this model, that would be Jimmy's spirit ascending up outside his body. So here, let's just dissect these a little bit. We'll talk about the physiologic or chemical, neuroanatomical reasons. So basically, the literature search that I found is this. There are no randomized controlled studies. In other words, there's no study, it's obviously not very feasible, where you have, a group of people, some die and some don't. That'd be very difficult to randomize. So there's no randomized control studies. It's based on hypothesis and simulations, not on actual brain activity or brain monitoring during the exact near-death experience. And the randomized controlled analysis is not there. So let's talk about the three models of the physical explanation or physiological explanation. There's the neuroanatomical, neurochemical, and the low oxygen or hypoxic explanation. So let's look at these separately. So the physiological explanation, the neuroanatomical model. So what this says is basically this is related to a physical injury to the brain. That's why it's called neuroanatomical. And the brain is injured, and studies use deep brain stimulation for this to bring about the near-death experience simulation. And their studies actually use hypnosis as well as deep brain stimulation. There's no study, as I mentioned, that looks at brain activity during the near-death experience itself. So the neuroanatomical model basically says that this happens in the brain. And there's actually a really good study where they use deep brain stimulation to mimic the near-death experience. So what this author found in his group, Blanke, in the Neurology of Consciousness journal, is that if you stimulate the frontal and occipital lobes on both sides, a person feels like they're flying out of their body. You stimulate the left temporal lobe, the person actually sees a bright light or a glow and actually hears music, and it's a very pleasant experience. So again, these are not actual near-death experience patients. These are patients that did not have the experience, but were given deep brain stimulation to mimic the experience. And then there's the neuroanatomical model, basically, that also uses hypnosis. So in this particular study, they actually took near-death experience patients, and they used hypnosis to relive that experience of the near-death experience. So using hypnosis and then EEGs to see what their brain activity was like during that time when they experienced a simulation of the near-death experience. So again, there's a big difference here. They're not actually having the experience. But what they found was that when they hypnotized them, they relived many of the same experiences, and there was increased activity in the frontal and occipital lobe in the back of the brain. And this was done by EEG studies and reported in scientific reports in 2019. And then there's a neurochemical model. So this model says, oh, no, it's not actually a physical injury. It's related to biochemical changes in the brain. So the neurochemical model, this is a really large study of near-death experiences. And essentially, they looked at 15,000 reports of near-death experiences, and they studied 165 drugs. And what they found is that the NDE was reported, particularly with the two top drugs, which is ketamine and DMT, which is dimethyltryptamine. So given those drugs, patients had essentially the same, very similar symptoms as a near-death experience. So their hypothesis was that it's a neurochemical, it's a chemistry that takes place in the brain that is resulting in near-death experience. And then there's a hypoxic model. Basically, it's related to loss of oxygen to the brain. And there was one study here done by French, 1,000 cases of hypoxia that he reviewed retrospectively, and then talked to the patients and surveyed them as to what they experienced when their oxygen level was low. And he found they experienced tunnel vision, bright lights, floating, and euphoria. So basically similar symptoms to the near-death experience itself. But then there's a spiritual model. So the spiritual model, ironically, was actually adopted by many hardcore scientists who were actually atheists before they started studying near-death experience or had the near-death experience themselves. And as I mentioned, Dr. Bruce Greystone is one of the key researchers and world-renowned on the near-death experience, 45 years of research, thousands of patients that he studied with near-death experience. And these are his conclusions. He studied over 2,500 patients, and he says that near-death patients report accurate details of the environment at the time. In other words, they have very specific details, like that lady who actually remembered his conversation with her friend in a different room, way beyond vision, way beyond auditory perception. And yet she was able to recount every single detail of that conversation. And so that for him is compelling evidence that there's actually a physical separation. There's something happening beyond a brain injury, beyond chemistry, beyond hypoxia. And his conclusion was that neuroanatomical, neurochemical, and hypoxic models cannot possibly explain the near-death experience. And then one of the most renowned authors as well on near-death experience is a neurosurgeon, actually, by the name of Ibn Alexander. And he himself had severe case of meningitis and encephalitis and became unconscious and lost his pulse, had a cardiac arrest, and had a very, very vivid near-death experience himself. Now, up to that point, he was actually an atheist. He did not believe in God. He did not believe in spirit, being separated from the body. But from this experience, he started doing his own research in the neurosurgical literature and the neurology literature on all the different theories, the neuroanatomical, neurochemical, the hypoxic theory. And he's become really renowned as a proponent of the spiritual model of a separation of the spirit and the body. And he speaks often. This is one of his books, Atheist Doctor Died and Saw God. And he's appeared on many TV programs, including Oprah. And of course, I guess if you appear on Oprah, then it must be true. Just kidding, of course. But this is Dr. Ibn Alexander's account. His personal experience, he said, was more real than reality. And he dismisses the neurological model, even as a neurosurgeon. So it's quite a paradox, and I think compelling evidence that there's something there beyond the physical. So he was actually transformed from an atheist before the experience to a believer in God. And he became actually a born-again Christian. So in summary and conclusion, we have the near-death experience. Is it physiologic? Is it just related to something that happens in the brain? Or is it spiritual? Is it actual separation of the spirit and the body and a potential encounter with God or an impending encounter with God? And so I would essentially put that question to you as listeners. I'm not going to answer it for you, but based on research, based on the personal experience of people like Jimmy, what is the near-death experience? Is there life after death? And is this a hint as to life after death, that we will leave our bodies, our spirits will leave our bodies, and will eventually be in eternity? Now, some experiences were pleasant, some experiences were horrifying. But we dug into this very deep question. It's a question that we all ask in life is, what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? And is this all about physical, that we all of a sudden when we die, we deteriorate and decay and that's it? Or is there something much deeper? Well, I think tonight we saw some compelling evidence that there is something much deeper. That's my own personal conclusion. But I would love to hear from you in the comment section, and you can email me as well in terms of what your thoughts are as to the near-death experience. So I just want to scroll through this here just to remind you that Doc Talk is happening every Thursday at 7:30. I love doing this program. Tonight was actually incredible. I did a lot of research on this tonight, both in terms of the thunderstorm. We saw Jimmy being hit by lightning. How many people can say that? But in terms of this near-death experience, and there's so much literature, there's so many books that have been written on it, and it's a fascinating topic. And it obviously there's going to be some confirmation bias, as with anything. People that don't believe that there's any spiritual explanation to anything in life will, of course, always gravitate toward the physical model, the neuro anatomical model, the neurochemical model, the hypoxic model, that their conclusion is there's nothing will convince them that there is a spiritual world, that it's just basically physical, reductionist, and evolutionary model. So I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Please remember Life in Medicine book I offer with any donation above $60. I will ship this to you along with the book, The Children Speak. And this is totally listener supported Doc Talk. I love doing it, but it's totally listener supported. So please consider donating or buying books. Again, as I say, if you give a donation of over $60, I'll actually ship the 2 books for you, which is actually less than if you actually bought them as well. So thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to next week, and I look forward to emails as well. You can email me at doctalkwithdrg@gmail.com. And please keep in mind that I will do one-on-one coaching. We've been navigating through many issues with listeners. They've approached me and have had great feedback on that, some great reviews. And it's something I'm passionate about. I'm humbled and honored to be talking to people one-on-one as well to navigate through difficult questions on health and wellness. So thank you very much. It's Dr. G reporting for Doc Talk with Dr. G, and we'll see you next time.